My name is David, and I graduated from the University of California, Berkeley, back in 2016. College was an incredible experience for me. I was part of a frat, balanced my academics well, and had my fair share of fun chasing after girls. Many of my old fraternity brothers remain close friends, and I recently got engaged to Rosie, whom I met during my time at Berkeley. However, if you'd asked me how I felt about Berkeley when I first arrived, my answer would have been completely different. What happened to me during my freshman year left a lasting impression. It's one of the reasons I wasn't particularly ambitious in high school. The atmosphere at Berkeley felt alien. It was unsettling to be surrounded by so many driven people who seemed to have their entire lives planned out at just 18. Suddenly, I was swept up in the frenzy of career development, as if every decision was critical to securing a future in business. It seemed ridiculous at the time, but that was the culture of my school. To get noticed, you needed a pristine LinkedIn profile. The stress of curating that online image still lingers in my mind. It felt like my future was riding on who I connected with and how I presented my skills. Nevertheless, I did everything I was supposed to and started applying for internships. One day, I got a message in my inbox, an actual, significant message. To my surprise, a renowned business firm expressed interest in me. It wasn't one of those generic spam emails. This message was tailored specifically for me. I must have read it over a dozen times before responding. After a brief exchange, they invited me for a first-round interview. I spent countless hours researching the company, preparing for every question I could find. Soon, I received a message from a man named Armin Slawinski, the one who would be interviewing me. That name still haunts me. Naturally, I tried to find out more about Armin. I searched for his LinkedIn profile, expecting to gain some insight into who I'd be meeting. But oddly, there was nothing, no profile, no social media, not a single trace. I dismissed it, thinking he might just value his privacy. We set a date and time for the interview, and he gave me the location, a small coffee shop in Oakland. That's when things began to feel strange. Why would the interview be in Oakland, when there were countless places closer to campus in Berkeley? The address seemed legitimate, though, so I didn't overthink it. The day before the interview, I told my friend Michael about it, and he immediately felt uneasy. He thought the whole situation seemed off. I agreed it was unusual, but the job opportunity seemed too good to pass up. He asked how I was getting there, and when I mentioned I planned to Uber, he offered to drive me instead. It was a kind gesture, and I accepted, completely unaware that his offer would be the reason I'm here to tell this story. The next day, Michael picked me up around 4 p.m. I was nervous, no doubt. This was one of my first real interviews. We drove for about 20 minutes before I asked Michael to drop me off nearby. I didn't want to be seen arriving with a friend for a professional meeting. He offered to wait for me, though, pulling out a bag of weed from his dashboard with a smirk. We laughed, and I stepped out of the car. I walked the last few blocks to the address and stopped dead in my tracks. There was no coffee shop. Instead, I found myself standing in front of a construction site. It wasn't even a residential area, all the surrounding buildings looked abandoned. Confused, I double-checked my phone. I was in the right spot, but this block must have been recently demolished, too recently for even Google Maps to update. As I started to pull out my phone to call Michael, a voice boomed from behind me. "David," it called, deep and commanding. I spun around to see a tall man, dressed in a sleek black suit, standing next to a matte black Bentley. Relief washed over me. Maybe this wasn't a mistake after all. His presence seemed entirely out of place in such a rundown area, but I tried to shrug off my discomfort. We shook hands, and when I asked about the construction, he appeared just as surprised as I was. "You know what? Let's find somewhere else to chat," he said, gesturing to the car. "Hop in." He walked back to the Bentley, casually calling over his shoulder, "Shotgun's yours." Without hesitation, I followed. But as I circled the car, something caught my eye. I glanced through the back window, expecting to see luxury seats. Instead, I saw a figure lying flat on the floor, gripping something long and metallic. The sight sent a chill through my body. Suddenly, everything clicked. This was a trap. Without a second thought, I turned and bolted. I heard the man shout my name, but I didn't dare look back. Then, I heard the sound I had been dreading, screeching tires. I glanced over my shoulder and saw the Bentley turning, heading straight for me. I ran faster than I ever had, but I knew I couldn't outrun a car. My heart pounded in my chest as I desperately searched for a way out. The streets around me were a maze, and escape seemed impossible. But as I reached the next intersection, I spotted a fire escape just low enough to grab. Fueled by pure adrenaline, I jumped and pulled myself up, scrambling up the ladder as fast as I could. The car screeched to a halt beneath me, but I didn't stop. I climbed higher until I reached a rooftop, watching as the Bentley lingered below. The driver stared up at me for what felt like an eternity before finally speeding off and disappearing around the corner. I collapsed, gasping for breath, then shakily dialed Michael. I told him everything, my voice trembling. He arrived shortly after, and we drove away in complete silence. After that day, I buried the memory deep, refusing to talk about it, even with Michael. But sometimes, especially now, every horrifying detail of what happened that afternoon comes rushing back, a reminder of how close I came to never making it out alive. This story is still fresh in my mind, as it happened not too long ago. My family was helping me move into college, where I'd just started as a freshman. Once we arrived, I learned I'd be living in what's called a Jack and Jill setup, 2 rooms connected by a shared bathroom. So, I'd be sharing the space with 3 other guys. One of them I already knew, we'd met during orientation and had hit it off. But the one I'm going to talk about is my actual roommate, Chloe. Before moving in, I had his socials, so we exchanged some messages to try to break the ice. But his responses were flat, almost lifeless. His Instagram looked like one of those profiles you'd see of a stereotypical Discord mod in memes. When we finally met in person, it was like the meme had come to life. Chloe was pale, awkward, with a wispy mustache, and had a strange energy about him. He barely spoke, and it was clear he didn't leave the room much. The first month went by without much happening, but as the second month rolled in, things began to feel off. Our desks were positioned directly across from each other, so every time we sat down, we'd be facing one another. He had this black screen taped to his monitor that blocked out whatever he was doing from view. Every time I entered the room, he'd either shut his computer off or put it to sleep so quickly, it seemed suspicious. I brushed it off, thinking he just valued his privacy. But then things got stranger. I'd catch him sitting at his desk, typing with a crazed intensity, mumbling under his breath like he was arguing with someone who wasn't there. As unsettling as it was, I ignored it, hoping it was just a phase. But what happened next, I never expected. One night, after I'd returned from a party, I found the door locked. I knocked, figuring Chloe would let me in. It took him 15 minutes to unlock the door, and when I entered, he had already gone to bed, or at least pretended to. That night, curiosity got the best of me. When he wasn't around, I started going through his things. That's when I found the letter hidden under his bed. In it, Chloe had written about how much he hated himself, how he saw no way out, and how he planned to end it all. Panic surged through me. I didn't know what to do, so I called his parents and campus security. A few days passed, and Chloe never returned to the dorm. Then, after a week, they found him. His body was hanging from a tree in a secluded part of campus, far from where anyone usually goes. Now, the guilt weighs heavily on me. I keep thinking, maybe I could have done more. Maybe I should have acted sooner. But it's too late now. It happened about 2 years ago when my friends and I decided to visit the Oregon State Fair together. There were 6 of us, and the day was picture perfect. The air was thick with the scent of fried food, the sound of music floated over from the rides, and we laughed ourselves to tears while trying, and failing, to win those stuffed animals. As the sun disappeared beneath the horizon and darkness crept in, the atmosphere began to change. Our final stop was the haunted house, a place we had been daring each other to enter all day. With the crowd thinning and the fair nearing its close, we thought, why not? It was one of those typical attractions, dimly lit hallways, actors in horror makeup jumping out at you, fake blood splattered everywhere. You know the type. The first room was exactly what you'd expect: cobwebs, flickering lights, and some guy in a cape lunging at us. But as we ventured deeper into the haunted house, something shifted. The air grew heavy, and the sound that had filled the place vanished. The actors, who had been overly enthusiastic in their attempts to scare us earlier, seemed to have disappeared. Silence filled the space. We found ourselves in a long, pitch-black hallway, broken only by faint, flickering lights. Tom, who had been leading the way, came to an abrupt stop. He froze, completely still, his face drained of color. He whispered that he saw a figure at the end of the hall, but none of us could see a thing. His sudden terror sent a chill through all of us. Eventually, Tom snapped out of his trance, but things only got worse. As we continued, we began to hear soft whispers, barely audible at first, but growing louder and more insistent. It wasn't long before everyone felt the weight of unease. I started hearing the whispers too, as if someone was standing right behind me, murmuring into my ear. Yet, every time I turned around, no one was there. One of my friends fainted on the spot, and we had to drag him out. When we finally made it out of the haunted house, we were all drenched in sweat, our nerves completely frayed. Later, we learned that the fairgrounds had a history of strange events. Rumor had it that the haunted house was built over an old cemetery that hadn't been properly relocated when the fair expanded. That night, it felt like something far more sinister than a costumed actor had been watching us. We never went back.